Beautiful.
Okay, now creator dashboard, manage stream. Yay, we are officially live.
That's
Hello,
awesome.
Mr. Howard. Would you mind introducing yourself for me, please?
Oh, it'd be my absolute pleasure. Please, please call me Gabe. My name is Gabe Howard, and I live with bipolar disorder. I wrote the book Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations. I'm also the host of the podcast Inside Bipolar for Healthline Media, which was Webby honored, which is super excited because I've never won a Webby award before. And I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in 2003 when I was 26 years old. And I just let people know that because I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder for over 2 decades now. So I've just got this wealth of lived experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I don't want anybody to think that it was all smooth sailing, but I don't want people to think that it was all desperation and struggle either. It's been, well, ups and downs, which is a great little analogy for bipolar disorder. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on. It has been honestly my first time having an interview. My guest did not have the right time, and so they did not quite show up. So I was incredibly nervous. So it's so nice that you're here. Um, what was your life like before you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. So before I want to say that it was normal, right? But isn't that like all messed up? I thought about suicide as far back as I can remember. When I
Hmm.
was 10 years old, when I was 5 years old, I never remember not weighing the pros and cons of life or death. But I define that as normal. I had all of the classic symptoms of bipolar disorder, the godlike mania, the suicidal depression where I thought I was garbage and my mom would be happy if I were dead. And yet I thought that was normal. I really thought that mental illness was something that happened to other people. And between us, I thought it happened to bad people, right? People who came from broken homes,
Mm.
people who had bad parents. I really thought that mental illness was like just this result of somebody making a mistake, usually parents and families, or maybe some sort of traumatic experience, like you went to war or you were the victim of a crime. I didn't think that perfectly normal, making air quotes, normal people could have mental illness. My mom and dad are good people. My grandparents loved me. My siblings loved me. We were pretty stable. I mean, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. We were stable. We lived in a middle class neighborhood, a blue collar neighborhood, and I went to public school. And I mean, I don't want to say that my life was Norman Rockwell, but before I was diagnosed, everything was stable and secure. I felt loved and supported, and yet I had these horrific symptoms of bipolar disorder that I thought were very normal, and that everybody felt this way, and that everybody thought this way, and that everybody's brain worked the same way as mine. So you can only imagine my shock when at 26 years old, I was committed to a psychiatric hospital and they're like, yeah, everything that's going on in there, not normal. I was like, oh, that does kind of make sense now that you're starting to point it out.
I I really relate to what you mean when you say that you always thought mental illness was this big event that happened to somebody. And I also thought that if I, especially because dissociative identity disorder is a trauma-based disorder, I thought that if I confessed that this was something that was actually going on in my head, if I confessed that to myself, then I was dishonoring my life, my family. Like I was saying that they did me wrong. But when the reality is they did the best they could and it's not their fault. And it took a long time to be comfortable enough talking with them about that. So I'm really, really glad that you've brought that up.
Oh, you're very welcome. And isn't that the rub, right? Like, there's so many things that happen to people that aren't really anybody's fault. Everybody was doing the best that they could, and we tend to go in one of two directions with that. Either because nobody maliciously attacked you, you're not allowed to feel bad about it. That's one way that we go about it. or even though nobody maliciously attacked you, they were negligent and they're bad. And I would just like to introduce a third option. I think the third option is really, really powerful.
Hmm.
And that's that both things can be true, right? The people around you were good. The people around me were good, but they made a lot of mistakes. And that impacted me. That caused me trauma. That caused me issues. That caused me sadness.
Hmm.
And that's okay too. I don't think anybody did anything to me on purpose, right? I don't think my parents set out to make me feel bad or set out to ignore the symptoms of suicidality or refuse to get their son help for bipolar disorder. They just didn't know any better. But
Hmm.
because they didn't know any better, that it took me a long time to get diagnosed. It took me a long time to get help. And that was really scary and traumatizing. I think both of those things can be true. I think when it comes to mental illness, I think everybody is just a little bit screwed. That's, that's
I
really the
couldn't have
best
said
way
it
that I
better
can put it. I
myself.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody gets messed up.
Ah, I'm not allowed to curse for 5 minutes. Thank you, Bradley Stale. I don't think I will be cursing today. That's usually for when we're playing games. I have little redeems that chat will do, and sometimes no cursing really hurts.
Oh no.
Would you mind wait, oh, I'm so sorry. I almost skipped forward. When did you start exhibiting behaviors? You mentioned that you were exhibiting it for almost as long as you could remember.
Yeah, the very first behavior that I ever recall was just this idea that suicide was a reasonable option. So that was like my first symptom, right? I know it's not quite a symptom, but when I thought about suicide, I thought it was normal. I thought that other people were weighing the pros and cons of life or death. I didn't realize that this obsession with ending my own life was problematic. I thought it was just part of the human condition. So that was really the first symptom. And I know that's kind of a gray area as far as if that's a symptom. But the next thing that I remember is depression. And I really hated myself. And some of that even still lingers to this day, even in recovery and with treatment. I spent so long just hating who I was and hating myself. But here's the downside of bipolar disorder. There's this whiplash effect where you go from hating yourself and thinking that you're human garbage to mania. And in mania, you think you're a god, you think the world revolves around you, and you think you're the greatest thing to ever live. It's part of the grandiose thinking. It's part of the manic energy. It's part of the rose colored glasses that are mania. So my first symptoms that I remember is sort of vacillating between I am garbage, and if I die, my mom will be happy, and I am a god, and everybody should bow down before me because I am the greatest there ever was. And I would go back and forth between that. And again, it's I use the term whiplash, but I don't even think that's a good word for it. I mean, just thinking that you're trash one day and thinking that the world revolves around you the next, it psychologically kind of messes you up because people don't know how to react to you. So people realize real quick, they're like, I have this group of people who thought that I was like this egotistical animal, right? Like, oh, Gabe thinks he's great. He's so egotistical and he's selfish and only cares about himself. And then I had this whole other group of people that really pitied me. That it's like, well, he has no self-confidence. He has no self-esteem. He doesn't like anything. He gets no joy. He's really sad. And
Hmm.
then sometimes those people would meet each other and they'd be confused. And I wouldn't know how to respond to them. The lack of consistency is really problematic in building stable relationships. So I had trouble maintaining friends. I had trouble maintaining jobs. I had trouble maintaining a lot of things. And that, of course, all led to loneliness and isolation. And again, you can be lonely in a crowded room. You can
Hmm.
feel loneliness and be surrounded by people because you're just not making that connection with them. And of course, I couldn't connect with them because they didn't know who I was going to be from day to day. So they didn't know what to connect with. People didn't mind being friends with, confident Gabe, but they didn't like, low self esteem Gabe. And of course, vice versa. So they were just like, we don't know what we're going to get. So we don't, we don't need his drama. And then they would go away for their own boundaries and their own protection. That's not a dig on them. I
No,
understand why they
yeah.
left. So it was tough.
That sounds incredibly alienating.
In credit that's a good way to put it. Alienating is a good way to put it.
Um, did you know about bipolar disorder before the diagnosis? And if you did, how did you view it?
So I had heard about bipolar disorder before I was diagnosed with bipolar, because there was a gentleman by the name of Kurt Cobain. He's the lead singer of the alternative rock band Nirvana, who was huge in the '90s, and he died by suicide, and he had bipolar disorder. Before he died from suicide, people knew that he had bipolar disorder. He'd even written songs about some of his treatment and some of the issues that he'd had. So because I was such a huge fan, I had heard of bipolar disorder through him. And unfortunately, I learned all of the wrong lessons. Right. I had this idea in my head that people with bipolar disorder were super creative and musical geniuses,
Mm,
and God had just bestowed upon them this gift of creativity and genius. Um, the reality is that was true for Kurt Cobain. He was a once in a lifetime musical talent. He was a lyrical genius. He was a great singer and musician, and just put incredible works out into the world. I don't think that was because he had bipolar disorder, though. I think that was just his innate talent, and he worked really, really hard on it. Bipolar disorder ultimately cost him his life. So I don't think that bipolar disorder made him a better musician, especially since ultimately he died from bipolar disorder. He died by suicide. So therefore, he's making zero music. But I sort of absorb. Whoops! I just banged into my microphone for no reason. I sort of absorbed all of those messages. So I thought that bipolar disorder was kind of like a tortured artist kind of backdoor deal. Like, yeah, you felt a little bad, but you got to create beauty from it. In reality, that's all BS. None of that's true. Bipolar disorder only takes, it doesn't give. If you're inspired by something bad that happens to you, that's fantastic. It doesn't make the bad thing that happened to you suddenly good. Um, People get inspired by the death of a loved one all the time. Um, the example that I always use is I think you'd be really hard pressed to find anybody whose parent died of a heart attack who doesn't suddenly start eating healthier, who doesn't start taking their own
mm,
health more seriously or start paying attention to their own mortality. But if those people started saying, I am so glad mom died because I'm just eating so many more vegetables, I'd be like, wow, that's real messed up. You
yeah.
killed your mom so that you could eat better. Like, wow. um
Mm.
so that's sort of how I feel about that whole trope of bipolar creativity. But I know the original question was, I got a little far
No,
afield,
no, no,
was
you're great.
did I know anything about bipolar disorder? I would argue that I knew nothing about bipolar disorder except for this kind of fantasy version that I had in my head.
And I would like to say that speaks to your own accomplishments as well, because you've written a book and you've touched so many hearts and you've touched so many minds and you've spread so much awareness. And I hope to reach half the people you have. And if I do, then I can go happy. I can go happy out of this world, however the fates decide to take me.
Mhm. Well, I hope you reach, 10 times the number of people that I do. We need so many people doing this. My my biggest challenge is just getting people to listen. And people like to listen to different things, and different things resonate. I would love to tell you that every single person who talks about bipolar disorder resonates with me, but the reality is they don't. Some people don't resonate with me. I think, I don't understand you. I don't get it. And that's okay. So that's why we need so many, we need many stars, we need many Gabes, we need many Rachels, Michelle's, Cody's, we need so many Natashas, we need as many people as humanly possible out there talking about this, because you just never know who's going to connect. And that's the thing. I'm a middle-aged white guy from Ohio. It makes perfect sense to me that a 16-year-old from Utah would not be like, well, why do I want to listen to a dude who's the same age as my dad? And I can respect that. When I was 16, I wasn't running around following a whole bunch of 40 somethings. I was listening to 20 somethings and other 16-year-olds. So I think it's really important that there's as many of us as humanly possible for this very reason.
I 100% agree with that. I'm very sorry. My cat demanded to go inside immediately, and so I had to run to do that, but I heard every word you said. I am but his butler.
Ah, don't worry, I have a dog that is equally demanding sometimes.
Oh, hang on one moment. He is telling me he does not have food.
Oh no.
And it is fixed. My apartment is very
Yay.
tiny, so everything is within an arm's reach of my desk. It's
Oh,
brilliant.
good, good.
It's so handy.
Mhm.
Would you mind sharing with us the story of how your diagnosis came about, what was going on in your life before, and how it transformed the way you were living?
So I thought about the ups and downs, or I'm sorry, I thought about the pros and cons of suicide my entire life. And when I was 26 years old, everything just kind of came to a head. Remember, I'd never been diagnosed. I'd never really gotten help. I had talked to some therapists a few times, but it never really took. And I was married, but I was getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a real big deal. This was my first divorce. So this was my high school sweetheart. And now she was leaving. It wasn't ending well. She was really upset. And I'd hurt her very much. I called her names. I was very emotionally abusive. I was very erratic. I was very unreliable. I had cheated on her. I want to make sure that your audience knows that I am not the hero of this story. I am the
Mm-hmm.
villain in her story. And that's a lot. It's a lot to take in because I don't want to be that person. And I didn't want to be that person. So as I'm sitting there contemplating, one, going through a divorce, two, having hurt the woman who I loved, three, losing my high school sweetheart and all of the memories that go along with that. I mean, I lost my virginity to this woman. I was supposed to be with her forever. We were planning on having
Mm.
6 kids, and now she's packing up of her stuff and leaving, and she hates me. That's a lot. It's a lot. And I just finally decided, I can't do this. I just I tried. I tried to be a good person. I didn't want to be a bad person. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to yell and scream. I didn't want to disappear. And honestly, I didn't want to cheat either. One of the symptoms of bipolar disorder that isn't talked about very often is hypersexuality. Now, I am not removing my responsibility from that. I don't want anybody to hear, oh, he's saying
Mm-hmm.
it's not his fault. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It's my responsibility. I did it. I'm responsible for it. It's no different than if you're driving your car and you pass out and you rear end somebody. It might not be your fault that you passed out, but it's still your responsibility to fix that person's car and make it right. So I was grappling with all of these things. Why did I do this? Remember, I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar disorder yet, so I did not know why I was behaving this way, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I didn't like it. And I knew that I hated myself. And I knew that I hated how I felt. And I knew that I was lonely. And I knew that I let my very Catholic grandmother down because now I've got to call my grandmother and tell her I'm getting a divorce. And she's not going to be pleased about this at all. So now I've hurt my grandmother, whom I love just more than anybody on the entire planet. And I'm just embarrassed, ashamed, lonely, depressed, and feeling like garbage. And I thought, I'm out of here. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I tried. I tried to be good, but I can't. And then the final sort of nail in the coffin, for lack of a better phrase, is that I convinced myself that my mother would be proud of me, that she would be at my funeral and be like, "Oh, he did a good job. Like this was a good thing. I'm so glad that he finally made the right decision by ending his own life." And I
Oh,
convinced myself that was reasonable. And luckily, just by luck, I can't be any more clear. By luck, I ran into somebody that knew what to do. And she walked right up to me and asked me if I was planning on killing myself. She used those exact words: Gabe, are you planning on killing yourself? Remember, I thought it was normal. I thought that everybody felt this way. So I had no problem answering yes. I said, yes, absolutely, yes. And she took me to the emergency room where I was ultimately committed to a psychiatric hospital and given the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, put on psychiatric medications, put into step down programs, and finally, after 26 years, got help for bipolar disorder.
that is an incredibly moving story. And my chat is saying taking responsibility is very mature of you.
Thank
They
you.
that is part of the reason I wanted to have you on here was because I knew that you weren't like 100% lily white, but neither am I.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand exactly what you mean by taking responsibility, even though sometimes you're because with DID, the amnesic barriers, but if someone in my system does something, we all have to take responsibility for it because we are all in this together. We are all operating the same body. And at the end of the day, we are all part of one consciousness. And if one of us does something, that means that we had the ability at the end of the day to do it. And so we have to take responsibility for that, no matter
Yeah.
how unfair it feels.
It's such an incredibly, I understand it. I want to say to your audience, and I want to say to you, like, I understand this desire to be like, it wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. Like, I get it. Like I want that so desperately to be good enough, but it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
If you hurt somebody, whether on purpose, accidentally, whatever, you owe them more than, oh, it's not my fault. And that's a very difficult thing to own up to, right? To walk up to somebody and try to explain what happened. And I've had to explain to quite a few people, listen, bipolar disorder is a huge pain. It's awful, and I have no excuse for what I did to you, but I need to make it right. And if you're willing to listen, I'll explain what was going through my mind. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I did. And this is my responsibility. And along that responsibility, and here's where I want to shift everybody's focus. I think this is really empowering. So many people hear this and you're like, well, that's not empowering at all. You're saying that nothing's your fault. Ah, there is something that is in my control, though.
Mm-hmm.
I can work really hard to get better. By acknowledging that I can't control bipolar disorder, I can control bipolar disorder. I know that's like a messed up. It's like, wait a minute, what did he just say there? He said by acknowledging that he can't control it, he can control it. And here's why. If you do the right things, if you work hard, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have setbacks. It doesn't mean that you're not going to relapse. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have issues. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have problems. It doesn't mean that you're not going to make mistakes. But if you're working really, really hard, at least at the end of every day, you can say, I tried. I tried to be a better person. I tried to control my issues. I tried to get better. I tried. And I really believe that if you keep trying and you keep working and you keep gaining experience and keep learning coping skills and keep learning about your illness and keep working hard, you will get better at it. I don't know what that means on an individual level. I'm not saying that every single person can be me. I'm not saying that every single person can be you, but I do believe that we can see benefits. We can see improvement. We can carve out little niches of happiness. We can find better, but we're never going to find any of those things if we just sit back and say, it's not my fault. And that's why I feel it's really empowering to take responsibility for this, because at least you're being proactive and at least you're out there jumping and working really hard.
I agree 100%. And the amount, oh, my chat says the amount of patience and that requires and self-awareness it takes to recognize that you can still get up and keep trying despite the barriers in your own mind is incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much, Tommy J. Shout out to you. Um, I have a great little community and oh, they just gifted me a tier 1 sub.
Aw.
That's so sweet. Uh, Part of the reason I wanted to do this on YouTube was because I'm not monetized there, and I didn't necessarily want this video to be monetized, but due to the technical difficulties, Twitch it is. Thank you so much. Oh my God. Yeah. Um, how did your family take bipolar disorder, your diagnosis? How did your family take being diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
So my grandmother got a phone call that I was committed to a psychiatric hospital. And the first thing that my grandma said was, don't say a word. I'm going to send a lawyer. In her mind, I was being arrested. Something really bad was happening. And given my
Mm.
grandmother's age, my grandmother was alive when all it would take for a woman to be committed to a psychiatric hospital is the nearest man saying she's hysterical. In my grandmother's lifetime, she remembers family members being committed to psychiatric hospitals because their husbands or fathers or uncles declared them insane. And that's all it took because women had no agency. So my grandmother was very concerned that something really bad was happening to me. So that was sort of the bumpy start. My mom was really concerned because she's like, well, I don't understand. We didn't do anything. Like,
Mm.
who did somebody beat you up? Did you get attacked? I mean, what bad thing happened to you? My parents really felt, they sort of believed that whole rock bottom kind of deal. Like in every reality show that has to do with anything mental illness, it's always like everything was fine, and then his son died, and that's when the bad stuff started. It's like, no, that's not when the bad stuff started. That might be when the really, really bad stuff started. That might have been the final thing before it got really, really bad. But it's not like everything was perfect. This one thing happened and then everything was bad. There's still bad stuff on the other side of it, and people don't seem to understand any of that. And so, and my parents didn't either. So they were trying to figure out what the hell happened. And I was like, nothing happened. I have bipolar disorder. So then they started to learn what bipolar disorder was. And I want to share at the same time, I was learning what bipolar disorder was too. So we were all very confused. We all believed all of this stuff. It wasn't just my family who was confused. I was even more confused and locked in in a psych ward. So I was very confused. And I started learning about bipolar disorder, what bipolar disorder is, what the symptoms are, how it works, what's happening. And then I started to see myself in it. I started to just really see myself. I was like, wait a minute. This this looks a lot like me. This sounds a lot like me. This is really starting to resonate. And and that's sort of when the scales fell from my eyes, for lack of a better phrasing. That's when I
Mhm.
really realized, okay, something wrong is happening. And if it's wrong, that means there's a right. That means I can get better. I don't have to feel this way. I don't have to end my own life. I don't have to be miserable. I don't have to hurt people. I can rebuild. And it took, you tell the story so quick, right? I go from being in a psychiatric hospital to feeling hopeless, and now I'm talking about how I reached recovery, etc. And that took like 2 minutes to tell the story, but in reality that was like 4 years of my life. There was 4 years worth of medication adjustments, 4 years worth of therapy, 4 years worth of coping skills, 4 years worth of mistakes, 4 years worth of success, 4 years worth of trial and error. And then I finally sort of mastered it, for lack of a better word. It doesn't mean that I never have symptoms anymore, or I never have setbacks, but I feel like I'm in a really strong foundational place. But it took a long time to get to that place, and I'm both proud of it and sad that it took so long for me to start that journey.
I really, really relate to that. Often I wonder what would have happened if I had figured out that there was something else going on, and I had sought help sooner. I started seeking mental health and mental help at around the age of 24. So actually not too far behind you. We're kind
Yeah.
of buddies.
Yay.
Um, can you tell us about bipolar disorder, the known causes and the most common signs? I know causes when it comes to bipolar disorder, that one's a little bit more.
Yeah, nobody really knows.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of brain research. It's sort of one of those things where they know what it looks like, the hallmarks of depression and mania, or as I shorthand it, garbage and God. One day you think you're garbage, the next day you think you're God, and by one day, I mean it can be weeks later. I don't want anybody to think that it works exactly like that, but it, it it's uh it's a frustrating little illness. I call it the intermittent illness. So bipolar disorder is that suicidal depression all the way to hypomania or mania, right? So you've got that spectrum. Now a lot of people think it's one or the other. It's like, oh, you feel like garbage today, you're low. Oh, you feel good today, you're high, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is on that spectrum you can move back and forth, which means you can be right in the middle. Now the middle is really important because the middle is average. The middle is stereotypical. The middle is normal. That is when you get the job, right? That's when you meet your significant other. That's when you accomplish things. That's when you're reasonable and rational and you lay down foundations and people rely on you. That's when you make the promises. That's when you keep some of the promises. And the issue is that when you spiral out of that, when you either go up to, your mania, or your hypomania, or you spin all the way down to your depression, you stop being that person in the middle. That person in the middle is who people know and love and trust. So when you start behaving on those extremes, they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? We counted on you, Gabe. Why are you behaving this way? And you think, I don't know. So then you get mad at them. You're like, you know what? Leave me alone. I don't feel good. Why are you doing this to me? Or if you're manic, you don't even care. You basically take on all the superpowers of the worst narcissist you've ever met, and you can only see things from your perspective. And that's where this illness is really tough, because the people observing you, they remember you in the middle. They're like, we know Gabe can be good. We know Gabe can be a good guy. So the only explanation they can come up with is that I'm doing it on purpose. And if I'm doing it on purpose, they're going to get angry. If somebody is hurting you on purpose, Star, you're going to put up a firm boundary. You're going to be angry. You're going to be upset. You're going to be hurt. They have no understanding that there's a disease process at play, because I had no understanding there was a disease process at play. It's not like I could say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm sick, because I didn't know I was sick. I didn't know anything. So I just made it worse. And and that is where bipolar disorder is insidious. It's this intermittent, insidious, evil little illness that just really wreaks havoc on the person that it's affecting, me in this case, and everybody that you love.
Um, can you explain the difference between hypomania and mania?
Yeah. So hypomania is the best way to put it is, hypomania, you are elevated, your mood is really elevated, go beyond excitement, it's elevated, you've got some mania, but you still have some control as well. So think of it as like a mixture of control versus elevated mood state. Whereas full blown mania, you're gone. You're just you've got all the power, all the superpowers, you're feeling no pain. So hypomania is sort of the stop right before mania. I do want to say though that both are equally damaging. Right? It's sort of like saying I have stage 3 cancer versus stage 4 cancer. I suppose on a practical level, stage 4 cancer is worse than stage 3 cancer. But I think if you have stage 3 cancer and somebody says, well, at least you're not sick like those fours, you're like, what? That's a stupid thing to say. I'm really, really sick. So
No.
yeah, don't play the suffering Olympics is what I'm trying to say. I hear way too many people in the bipolar community are like, well, I have full blown mania, I don't have hypomania. I'm like, well, that's great. I don't, hypomania is still really damaging. But sorry, to get back to the question, if you're going up that scale, you're going to hit hypomania first, mania second. Now, many people who have bipolar 1, which is the full blown mania, they kind of skip past hypomania and just go straight to full blown mania. But it's still possible to have that hypomania. To finish off the explanation, in bipolar 2, you stop at hypomania and you never have those full blown manic spells.
Okay.
Hypomania is still very damaging though.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I don't think a comparison there is fair at all.
Yeah.
Um, I saw a really great question in my chat, mostly because I know it's relevant.
Yay.
One of my chatters, Bradley Stale, noticed your tattoo, and
Oh, oh, which?
that one, yeah.
Yay.
And they were wondering the significance of it.
Yeah. So this is the bipolar logo. So I sort of popularized it. I'm gonna, whoops, I'm gonna end up away from my microphone. But basically, the way it works is you've got your happy face, and then of course your sad face, and because it's together, it's back and forth on the spectrum. So all the way from happy to sad, and then everything in between. So in bipolar disorder, of course, you have that elevated range of emotions. So that was just a way that I came up with to represent it. It's been around for a long time. You can also see I've got it in the cover of my book.
Ooh.
Right. Oh, I can't find my finger. Right. Oh, there we go. boop, right there. So, but it's just the logo that I've used for years and years and years and years and years and years. I accidentally made it up about 20 years ago. Never thought to copyright it or really take any credit for it. So it's kind of out there, and I don't think anybody really realizes that it's me, but it was me.
Well, that's amazing. I love that.
Thank you,
Um,
thank you.
so how does being, oh no, wait, I'm skipping one. Um, how can you tell when you've entered a manic episode or a
It's
hypomanic
really
episode?
so it's really difficult to tell when you've entered a manic episode, and we're the example that I always use is rose-colored glasses, right? We all sort of understand the concept of rose-colored glasses, where no matter how crappy things are, we see it as good. And somebody says, "Well,
Hmm.
you've got your rose-colored glasses on. You need to admit it. You need to admit it. You need to be reasonable. You need to be rational." But you're having trouble seeing it for whatever reason. Maybe you're in love. Maybe you don't want to believe it. Maybe facing it is too hard. So we're all familiar with that sort of a concept. So when you go over to Mania, Mania sort of works like that. Mania has the best public relations team in the world. No matter what happens, Mania convinces you that it's good. And here's an example. So I have this story, and here's what I believe happened. This is 100% what I believe happened. I went to a bar, a music venue
Hmm.
that had live music. And while the band was playing, I got on the bar and I started singing. And I was so good that the band stopped playing. They brought up the house lights and everybody watched me. And while I was singing, people were like, Gabe, 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 Gabe. And I was singing. And then when I was done, people were like, woo, we love you. And they carried me out of the building and they were like, Gabe, you were excellent. Oh my God. Honestly, it's one of the best moments of my life because of how incredible I was and how much everybody loved me. Now, anybody listening to this should start to notice some holes. They would be like, okay, dude, wait a minute. We've been to a concert before. We've been to live music. How on earth did a dude on a bar with no microphone overpower the band? That doesn't make sense. How did anybody even know? And also, why would they bring up the house lights? That doesn't If you were so good, why didn't they invite you on stage and get you a microphone? What's not adding up here? Here's what, of course, is not adding up. The reality is what actually happened is I jumped up on the bar, and now you've got this guy on a bar, and it's dangerous, and they couldn't get me down, and they were afraid that I was going to fall over, so they asked the band to stop. They're like, we got to get the band to stop. Obviously, once the band stopped, this gave all the patrons nothing to do but watch me. So they were booing me, they were yelling at me, they were telling me to stop it, right? But I was up on the bar, singing or screaming or who the hell even knows what. But they had to bring up the house lights so the bouncers could get over to me and get me down. Once they got me down, they didn't cheer me out of the building. They cheered because I got thrown out. And I got thrown out because I was just standing on a bar disrupting everything as a danger to myself and others. But in my mind, I remember it as that beautiful moment where everybody loved me. I don't need to
Wow.
prove which version is true. Anybody hearing my version of the story knows that my version could not happen that way. It is impossible. Anybody who has ever been to a concert has screamed as loud as they can in their friend's ear, and their friend still says, What? What? And yet somehow I managed to get a whole room full of people to hear me over the band. Come on. Also, they let me perform on the bar. That's dangerous. You're not allowed to climb on bars. That'll get you thrown out real quick. So, but I believe it. I believe it because Mania convinced me it was true. And even though I believe all of my friends who were there and told me what actually happened, and even though intellectually I know that my version is impossible, that's still what's in my head. That's still how I believe it. If lie detectors were real, I would pass because that's how the memory was formed in my brain by Mania. That's how dangerous Mania is. It can convince you of things that aren't even true.
I read that mania could, in some extreme cases, lead to psychosis.
It can.
Uh,
Yeah. Psychosis is a real issue with bipolar disorder. It's not as common as in other illnesses, but nevertheless, it is a real it is a real concern that people need to be mindful of, that often people aren't mindful of.
That is dangerous and
Incredibly so.
mind-boggling. Yeah, no. Wow. I'm glad that you're okay.
Yeah, me too.
Um, can you describe some bipolar burnout and your methods of combating it?
So bipolar, it, man, there's just so many. The first thing I want to say is coping skills adapt and evolve. So when I get stressed out or tired, there's just of dealing with it. I realize that I need a break, and I know this is going to sound like really, really. I just I don't even know what word to use. I just one of the biggest things that I do when bipolar disorder is just really at its peak in my life is just sit and watch television, just mindless TV, stuff that I've watched before, reruns of Futurama or King of the Hill or Family Guy or American Dad, just mindless TV I've seen dozens of times, reruns of The Office, uh, because I can just kind of sit there and it's familiar, it's nostalgic, it's comforting. I don't have to get anxious or worried about what's going to happen because I know what's going to happen, and I just kind of zone out and just kind of let it wash over me until I calm down. And I find that to be very, very helpful. Other things that I do are people watch. I like to go to the local fast food restaurant, or, order a soda and just sit in the corner. I play on my phone. I read, various, articles, like I read Mental Floss a lot because it's just interesting. And then just watch people, just watch what they do, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Listen to how they interact with their families, listen to what they talk about, just get a gauge on what's going on in other people's lives. And what I almost always learn is that my life is actually really normal. Everybody's boring, nobody's doing anything. We have moments of greatness, we have moments of excitement, but for the most part, people are just existing, and that's not a bad thing. I
Hmm.
think that sometimes I have to remind myself that the vast majority of people are just trying to feed their kids and get home.
Yeah, for me, it's my cat.
For me, it's my
Yep.
dog.
Um, how does being manic affect you and how do you deal with it? We discussed that a little bit with your story, but now that you know more about being manic and you can understand more of the signs, how do you deal with being manic?
So one of the great parts of my life, I've the medication keeps mania at bay. So I don't really get manic anymore. Again, knock on wood. Now that I've said it, mania's in there like, oh, we're gonna get them. But I haven't had a manic spell in almost 15 years. Again, knock on wood.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it is incredibly fantastic because mania is so damaging. And I haven't had suicidal depression in the same amount of time. Now I've had a little bit of hypomania. I've had a little bit of depression, right? I don't want people to hear that I've had zero symptoms, but the big extremes, the very, very dangerous extremes, the medication has been able to keep under control. So, but I do want to give an answer. One of the things that I tell people if you're managing any sort of mental illness or mental health issue is you've got to be very aware of where your baseline is and how far away from it you are.
Hmm.
Everybody's going to move back and forth along their baseline, right? Otherwise, everybody would just be, hi, my name is Gabe, all the time, right? So sometimes you're happy. Hi, my name is Gabe. Sometimes you're annoyed. Hi, my name is Gabe, right? Sometimes you're sad. Hi, my name is Gabe. And then sometimes you're just in the middle. Hi, my name is Gabe. You're nothing, right? So it's okay to have emotions, right? But you really want to notice where you're like, hi, my name is Gabe, right? You're like, whoa, that's really abnormal. Or if somebody says, hi, my name is Gabe and nobody cares about me and I wish I was dead. Hate my life, right? You want to be aware of how far away you are from that baseline. And I think that's really important for people to understand. So when you're to answer your very specific question of what do you do about mania, knowing that you're getting close to mania is its own prevention, right? Being able to stop it before you get there has so much value because once you're manic, you're kind of at its mercy. You really are. You either need medical intervention or you need to wait for it to pass. And both of them have pluses and minuses, mostly minuses.
Mm. Um, what are some misconceptions about bipolar disorder that you seek to dispel? This is one of my favorite questions, and I would, as many as that you want to lay on me, you go
Yeah.
right ahead.
The biggest one that I want to dispel is that there's no good. There's no good. There's no backdoor deal where yes, it hurts you in the following ways, but it makes you a good detective. I get so annoyed at television where they're like, the man with bipolar disorder is a really good detective. The woman with bipolar disorder is a great Homeland Security operative because she just sees the world differently. Oh, that painter has bipolar disorder, and that's why the art is so beautiful. Oh, Van Gogh had bipolar disorder, and that's why he created Starry, Starry Night.
Mm,
What nonsense is this?
we're
First off,
romanticizing mental illness there.
they're glorifying it. They're
Yeah.
and here's the part that nobody seems to realize when they believe that stuff. They gave all the credit to an illness. Van Gogh wasn't a talented artist. Bipolar disorder was a talented artist. Well, you just sucked away somebody's humanity, right?
Hmm.
Could you imagine if you worked so hard, Star, and somebody was like, "Oh, you're so lucky you have dissociative identity disorder because that's why you're good at this."
Yeah,
You're like,
no.
but what about all my hard work? Well, what about all my effort? What about all my talent? What about me? Nah, it was bipolar disorder. It was DID. It was depression. It was anxiety. It was stop it. Now, people they really don't like that. They really like this idea of the tortured artist or the creative suffering leads to great art. Ah, now hang on. I got something for those folks. I haven't forgotten you because I too live in the real world. If something bad happens and you can turn it into a positive, I agree that that's amazing. And there are a lot of people who have been inspired to create beauty because of their struggles. There are a lot of when Van Gogh was in the asylum and he painted Starry Starry Night, which was per him his view from his window while he was hospitalized for depression. Let's not lose sight of that. That was an excellent case of taking lemons and making lemonade. And that's why I think Van Gogh is amazing because he was able to find the beauty in the darkness. He was able to create enough light in darkness to create beauty, and that is on him. That's why he's amazing. That's not why bipolar disorder is amazing. That's why he's amazing. So if you're inspired by your illness, if you find the light in the darkness, the beauty in the ugly, give yourself the credit. Don't say that it's bipolar disorder that's the superpower. No, you're the superpower. I
Hmm.
think people are giving credit to the wrong thing.
I 100% agree. And that honestly, that makes me so happy that we're talking about this because even though we are both mental health activists, we are not just our mental illnesses. And
Right.
we are human. We bunny bounce, or some of us are bunnies, I guess.
Oh, this is awesome. I know we're almost out of time. Do you have any like rapid fire questions that you want to
Okay.
ask me real quick to make sure we
Yes.
cover them all? I don't want to leave anybody out.
Okay, so we're gonna go through real quick. Um, oh, this is a one that my chat actually had. Do you ever deal with people disbelieving that you have bipolar disorder? And if you do, how do you handle it?
All the time. All the time people say that I'm faking it. And I always say, to what end? I really do my best to ignore those people. And I know that's easier said than done.
It really is.
If it's online and they say it, like if it's in the comments of my work or somebody sends me an email where they're like, you don't have this, you just need to nature bathe or do yoga or get better nutrition, I just ignore them. I there's a well respected phenomenon on the internet called "Don't feed the trolls." So whenever it happens online where people deny it, I just ignore them. If it happens in person, especially if it's somebody whom I have a relationship with, a family member, a friend, a colleague, somebody I trust, and they say it, I very politely pull them aside and I ask them why. Like what where's the disconnect? And I do it very politely, right? I don't say, what the hell's wrong with you? Of course I have bipolar disorder. How could you say this? What is wrong? Why do you think I don't? Like, I don't do that. I pull them aside privately one on one and I say, hey, I heard that you think I'm faking, or you told me that you don't believe that I have bipolar disorder. I I just want to talk it out. I want to reach the same page and I want to find out why. I will say that the number one reason that people don't believe that I have bipolar disorder is because they don't believe in bipolar disorder. It's not because they think that I don't have it. They don't think anybody does. And
Mm, I can
unfortunately,
relate to that one.
yeah, yeah. And you know, here is something that I want to say. We went through a global pandemic. The whole world went through a global pandemic. And there is a significant number of people who don't believe that that was real. So it's not really all that absurd to think that people don't believe that bipolar disorder is real. You know, there's a whole group of people who believe the earth is flat. There's a whole group of people that believe all kinds of things. So the fact that there's some people out there who don't believe in bipolar disorder, don't believe in mental illness, don't believe in mental health, that's not really all that surprising. And it says more about them than you. If it's somebody in your family or a friend or somebody that you have to interact with, you've got to find a way to set that firm boundary and just agree to disagree, right? I have a family member who believes the earth is flat. The earth is not flat. But we don't spend every day arguing about it. He knows that I don't believe him. I know that he thinks I'm wrong, and we never talk about it again because I do want to preserve the relationship because he's a family member. However, if he wasn't a family member, I probably just wouldn't be his friend. I mean, I would cut off contact because who wants to be friends with somebody who calls you a liar or who doesn't
Hmm.
believe in your illness? But the world is not that simple. We can't always cut out our in-laws. We can't always cut out our family members. We all have a third cousin who's weird, right? We can't always cut off the people we want to. So that's where you have to set a firm boundary that we're not going to discuss it. You have heard them out, you have answered their questions, and if they don't believe you, that's fine, but stop. We're done. Don't spend every waking moment trying to convince me about this. Boundaries are really important.
I respect that. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Boundaries, boundaries. I love it. I love it.
One
I
of my
love the
favorite
energy.
cheers.
Mhm.
Okay, I've got two more questions, and then we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna thank you guys so much for coming on. By the way, again, this has been one of my best interviews to date, even though I've only had three, and they've all been amazing.
Awesome. Mhm.
Um, what are some of your favorite ways to ground yourself when your anxiety starts to carry you away?
So I again, I know this sounds funny, but some of my favorite ways to ground myself are just to go be alone. And and that's easier said than done, right? So when I ground myself, I just like to take a moment and be alone. But people are like, it's really hard to be alone. I have some ideas for you. First off, we all have these things called phones. All right. Fake a phone call. Just if you're starting to get anxious, et cetera, in a crowd, just say, oh, hey, I've got to take this, right? And then go out, be alone, put the phone up to your ear and just start talking into it. You can talk to yourself, or you can, when you get outside, you can also plug in maybe like a podcast that you like, or a mantra that you like, or a song that you like that really grounds you, and just stand outside with it to your ear and listen. Now, if you're not in a situation where you can fake a phone call, listen, this is not the sexiest thing I'm ever going to say on a podcast, but I'm telling you, fake diarrhea. Just stand up, hold your stomach, and say, I'll be right back. Nobody will ask you a single question. Just trust me. It's the universal get out of jail free card. Just stand up and say, hey, I'll be right back. I got to run to the bathroom. Put your hand on your tummy. I'm putting it on my chest so you can see it, but put your hand on your tummy and just say, hey, I got to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And then go. Nobody will ask you any follow up questions. You can go sit in the stall, stand in the stall, do whatever you need to do, walk around the building, find the far, just nobody will ask you a follow up question when you get back, because that would just be the most awkward follow up question ever. If you are with people you trust, you can say, hey, I need to take 5. I'll be right back. And if you've set up that, with my wife, with my friends, with my family, I can say, hey, I need 5, and I just get up and go, and they know to leave me alone, right? Because I've built that ahead of time, right? But those are 3 ways that you can just really get away and ground yourself. I find those alone moments, whether I just listen to a podcast, read an article, people watch. Sometimes if I need longer, I'll say, hey, I need like a 45-minute break, and I'll drive to the local, convenience store or fast food restaurant and get a Diet Coke. I drink a lot of Diet Coke. Um, and but there's like a ritual around it, right? I get in my car, I drive there, or I walk there, or I find it, I get there, I order it, I sit, I people watch, I play on my phone, I decompress, and then I can go back and really start up again. So I really recommend that you find the coping skill that works for you. I know people that are just like, oh, whenever I get super anxious, I find a treadmill. I just, wherever I am, I find a treadmill. People have like Planet Fitness memberships so that wherever they are, they can just go and find a treadmill and run off the energy. And I think it's fantastic. Whatever works for you, just find the best way to get yourself to it. And I'm telling you, do not underestimate the grabbing your tummy and saying you have to use the bathroom, or looking at your phone and saying, oh, I've got to take this, I'll be right back. Both things work very well.
Your comfort level is more important.
Exactly.
Mhm. And my last question for you, do you have any words of advice for anyone watching who is struggling with anxiety or bipolar disorder?
The first thing is know this is temporary. It's really, really important when we don't catastrophize, right? The I understand why people warn us about the worst case scenarios, right? That's super important. But let's forget about bipolar and anxiety for a moment and talk about house fires. Could you imagine if every time somebody gave you a fire prevention tip, they said this? Okay, your house is engulfed in flames and you're trapped behind the door and the building is ready to burn you alive. Okay, here's what you do. Everybody would panic. So if you notice, the way that we talk to ourselves about house fires is step 1, prevention, right? Make sure that in your kitchen you have a fire extinguisher, have smoke alarms, right? Have, test the smoke alarms, every 6 months, right? We talk about that. Then we talk about small fires. Hey, remember, smother a grease fire. If you have a grease fire, put the lid back on it, put a towel over it. Remember, here, practice using your fire extinguisher. Here's how you do it. You pull the pin, you pull it out, you aim, and you fire, right? They talk about small fires, right? They talk about, if there is a small fire and you can't put it out, immediately go to the edge and call 911 immediately. Call the fire department immediately. So the first thing that I want to remind everybody is we tend to try to figure out what to do when the house is engulfed in flames when it comes to bipolar and anxiety. We need to become aware of what to do when there's a small little fire, when there's a little bit of smoke, when there's a little grease fire, when there's something small, when the building is not engulfed. We need to be aware of those emotions so that we can get ahead of it before we're trapped behind the door. So my biggest advice is to learn your emotions and know when you're getting close, and to practice what to do. Listen, going back to my earlier example, just practice it sometime. Even when you're not having anxiety, when you're not overwhelmed, when you're not depressed, just stand up and put your hand on your stomach and say, I'll be right back, just to gauge what people will do when you say that. Just look at your phone real quick and say, hey, I need to step out for a moment, just to gauge what people will do. Practice it when you're not sick. You don't have to wait until the house is on fire to have a fire drill. In fact, it's better to have a fire drill when the house is not on fire.
That is incredible advice. I love that. And I think that is a brilliant note to end on. Gabe, thank you so much for coming on and being on stream with me today. And
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
don't forget to check out Gabe's book, Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations.
Yep. Go to gabehoward.com and I'll sign it for you.
Do you have an audiobook version?
I unfortunately do not.
That's okay.
Unfortunately, it's cost prohibitive.
I understand completely. Well, if you if you ever want some help accumulating a team of voice actors to work pro bono, let me know. I will see what I can do. I have a wonderful little community, and several of my community members do voice acting pro bono.
Oh, nice, nice.
Well,
That would
you
be
have a
awesome.
absolutely. Thank you, Gabe, and thank you for the awesome interview. And you don't have to wait until the house is on fire to have a fire drill. Yep, that's a fantastic final statement. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.